today we continue on with the series. We got this week and next week. This week I'm talking about, in the title slide, if I can get there, talking about darkness, invisible light, unseen light. Well, it's not there yet.
Darkness is there.
It's really dark. Really effective graphic here. Wouldn't you agree? I was really on it this week. Nicely done, Ann. That's good. So the whole theme of this thing is, there it is, unseen light. The whole theme of this series is based on this verse from Matthew 5, chapter 5, verses 14 and forward. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light. This is Jesus speaking to the crowd, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. And now that I put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. So today I'm talking about unseen light. Just out of curiosity, how many of you can kind of be out all day in the sun without skin protection and you're just fine? A few of you like that, right? How many of you, like, you think about the sun and you're practically burned? Yeah. Very good. We fail to realize that the light that we see is not all the light that is. In fact, our eyes are only capable of picking up a certain frequency of light. And it's really not that big of a bandwidth, honestly. There are other animals in the animal kingdom in the world that have a much broader spectrum and can see much more than we can. And what we would consider total darkness, some animals can see just fine. We just don't have it in here. And I think that's really important for us to think about when we think about this concept of unseen light. What is going on that we might not even recognize is going on, that we don't even see because we just don't have the receptacles to get it. I don't know if you're following me in all this. This is a deeply theological thing for me because I'm a curious person anyway. I like to discover things. I like to read stuff that's, out of my normal world. So, there's a physics books I've been reading, tapped a lot of this light stuff. I love that stuff. I like watching shows that are about quirky, weird things. I love podcasts that are the same. And I wonder about theology and our biblical tradition. And I wonder, is it possible that some of the things that we see in Scripture, some of the things maybe we've gotten a little too smart about, and I'll talk about that, and dismiss some things when really we're seeing unseen light at work. So I want to talk about those themes. But first, I have to introduce you to this beauty. This is a gun. You may not have realized this. It's a gun because it has a sight on it. So we were driving back from this wedding in Kansas and stopped for a few hours in Fort Collins for lunch and kicking around. It's a really cool town. And there it goes this way. Close call. So somebody could have really gotten hurt there. Right? So there's a science store in this downtown area that they've developed. It's really, really cool. And this guy, if you could ever have an evangelist for science, this is your guy. I mean, this guy was so animated. He was going out into the square, bringing his experiments, and all these kids are flooding around. He sucked me and my family into a store. I ended up blowing $50 on stuff I don't really need because he was so good at what he did. And this was one of the cool things I bought. But I was thinking of you when I bought this. Not that I think about guns when I think of you, but this time, I really did. So this is an air gun. I'm going to shoot one of you just to experience this thing. So Donnie, you up for this? All right, this will probably hurt. So, we have good insurance. I think our insurance is paid up, right, Bobby Jim? All right. So the interesting thing is, hopefully I'll get this right. It got Jeff. Did it get you? I missed you. Off a little bit. Did that get you? I'll work on it. All right. Let's try Leslie here. Didn't get it? Hang it. Chrissy. You get it? All right. Get you? All right. Sharon?
All right.
So the way this played out in the stores, we got in this hallway inside. I think the outdoor thing may be messing with us. And they made Lynn, my wife, stand at the end of this hallway, maybe 20 feet away. And the guy said, I'm gonna make your wife's hair blow, and I'm gonna make her smile. And I was like getting ready to punch him. And then he gets at the other end. And he does it. And sure enough, her hair went like this. And sure enough, she smiled. She's like, I did not expect that. And it's the weirdest thing because it's so specific. And the thing can be going. Got you again, all right. I don't even know who I'm hitting, so. Anybody? Oh, I got the thing on that. All right.
Sitting over there.
Misfire. Hey, all right, I got Fred. All right. Lisa Haas, is it your birthday today? Everybody, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Lisa. Happy birthday to you. I get you? Maybe. Dang it. All right. Well, you can have fun with this afterwards, but what's so cool about this is you look at it, and if you're not really in line with where this thing's shooting, you don't really feel anything, and you're like, what's the big deal here? Until somebody gets hit. And they're like, something just happens here. And you can't really explain it. There are some laws of physics involved here that make this thing work, and you can play with it later. But I was thinking about a lot of stories in Scripture that, especially in our time in history, when we think so much and we're so confident in our intellectual capacity. Good luck with the last song, Dan. That'll be entertaining. Anyway, I think sometimes we get too smart, and so we look at things in the Bible and we're like, oh, that didn't happen. No, that was just rolling through. So Abraham, who kind of got not just Judaism going, but eventually is the foundation of Islam and then ultimately Christianity as well. You know, here's a guy who heard God speak in profound ways that were so compelling that he actually listened to the voice. And he left what was normal, he left his culture, and he started fresh. He heard God's voice. His great-grandson Joseph, fast forwarding, was able to understand dreams in profound ways. It's like he had this spiritual capacity, this unseen skill to discern what these dreams were about, and he was right about them. Moses experienced a burning bush in the middle of nowhere. Moses sensed God leading him to say crazy stuff about things that were going to happen in Egypt, plagues and all kinds of stuff. Moses told the people to, take the blood of the lamb and put it over their doorpost to prevent death from taking their children, and it worked. Moses held up his staff, and somehow God moved and parted water so that people could go freely. Later on, Moses keeps his staff up during a battle, and so long as his arm is up with his staff, they win the battle. But when he got tired, they started to lose the battle. So people came around him to keep his hand up so they'd win the battle. That's weird stuff. And then you move into some of the prophets, Elijah and Elisha, and crazy stuff that they somehow were able to do. And it just makes you wonder, you have this thing, this dilemma, and the more you get educated, the more doubtful you become. Like you look at it, well, that's just a story. That's just them talking about this. It's history remembered, but they meant for it to just be metaphor. But then you get into Jesus, and all of a sudden this guy seems to be way in tune. This peasant, this guy who shouldn't be anybody, this peasant somehow gets so infused, so incarnated, that it's like what he says is like coming right from the heart of God. And it's like the people he speaks these things to, they're saying like, wow, it's like you were talking right to me there. Like that's what God wanted me to hear you say. And then he did this healing stuff, and he was famous for it. Non-Jewish historians, would just say he was a magician. and a pretty impressive one, because his name is in the history books of non-Christian, non-Jewish people. That's impressive. And of course, you know, he did some other miracles which are pretty wild, kind of hard to get our brains around. Walking on water without water skis or a boat, pretty impressive. Calming storms, feeding thousands, going up to a son, the only son of a widow, during the funeral procession, probably while they're on their way to bury him, and he goes up and he touches the kid and says, "Rise," and he does, restoring life to him and hope to his mom. Calls out to a tomb behind which is Lazarus, one of his dear friends who'd been dead for 4 days, and has him roll away the stone and calls Lazarus to come out. And he does. Jesus, who appeared alive again after he was dead 3 days, to the disciples, to other believers, and hundreds more. This is unseen light. And it's mind-blowing. And I think we have this tension within us of what do we do with this stuff? Of what seems to be nonsense, or just seems to be, you know, whatever myth or whatever we want to call it. How do we grapple with this stuff? You ever struggled with that? As a thinking person in today's age, when we know a lot more, when you know that this, hey, gotcha, is not a magic trick, but it's just science. That some things which are unseen, literally, you know, are there because we have tools now to be able to pick up light that we couldn't before. What do we do with it? So I'm a little autobiographical with you, and I hope that some of this will be helpful. So here's what I want you to do on your little card that you have. I think I put up enough there. This one you're going to keep, and you're going to take home. And I just want you to write 4 words, and I want you to put them, you can either do them probably just in a line, but you can put them any way you want. Maybe that'll tell us something about your personality. And there are 4 words that I want you to put on there. The first word that you need to put somewhere is beginnings. Just write the word beginnings. Now you can go to the next screen too, slide. 3. And the next word I want you to write is adolescence. If you don't know how to spell adolescence, I don't either. So do the best you can. And then the next word I want you to write is early adulthood, which is different than adolescence. And then the final word I want you to put on there is maturing. And I just want to tell you my struggle with unseen light today, and give you a little bit of my history. And maybe your history's like mine, maybe it's not. Maybe some of the things that I've learned will be helpful to you. I hope so. And maybe by the end of this, we'll have a different way of thinking about unseen light. I hope so. So I grew up in a mainline church. Our church's heritage is American Baptist. Usually when people hear Baptist, they get a little nervous, which they should. But in our case, American Baptist is an incredibly broad, extremely diverse, most diverse Baptist entity in the world. I mean, it's really an awesome, awesome thing. I think it's really what Baptist is supposed to look like, where you have churches that have the freedom to express themselves and think however they want, do worship however they want. It's called local church polity, and it simply means that we as a church have the right to do whatever the heck we want, and nobody can tell us to do it otherwise from the denomination. They don't have the right to do that. That's not their job. Our job is to come together. The reason the denomination exists is to provide a forum for all of us to come together to do bigger things in the world than we could ever do on our own, and to support each other when we need help. Our church was supported along the way. Our church was started because some people on the East Coast thought it'd be a really good idea to have a church in Napa Valley. So we were born with their help. But we're a mainline church, which means we're not an evangelical denomination. And I grew up in the mainline expression of that, which means the churches I grew up in, I never really heard a lot about heaven and hell, or if you don't say yes to Jesus, you're going to burn forever kind of stuff. That stuff was just not part of it, because in most mainline denominations, the theology you hear is that Jesus is the one who leads us in the ethical way of life. Listen to Jesus, follow in the footsteps of Jesus, and your life's going to go better. It's just the right thing to do. And so that resonated with me. And I was baptized when I was 10 years old. I was in 4th grade, baptized by my father, who's a pastor. And it meant a lot to me. It really was a commitment I knew I was making. It wasn't just something my parents said, well, hey, you got to do this. If you ever want to taste communion, you got to do this first. That would actually probably work for me, but they didn't. And I meant it. And I remember, after I was baptized thinking, okay, what this means is I've just made a commitment. I've made a decision, a declaration that I'm going to do the best I can to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. Because that's what I've learned. That's what my church has taught me. And that worked for me pretty well. It didn't keep my nose completely clean, but it kept me probably a lot better kid than if I'd never learned that stuff. Because the ethic of Jesus works. Then in high school, when I was 15 years old, got to know a friend who would later become my sister-in-law. Brenda is her name. And she happened to be my neighbor at this little old hunter's cabin that my parents bought when I was in high school. And we'd go work on it in the summer, and I'd spend my summers up there and all that. Anyway, she and I would get to know each other and hang out and talk and all that. She was the only one close to my age. And I noticed something different about Brenda. That for her, this whole faith thing, whenever she talked about it, it wasn't some kind of out there ethic, just a way to think about doing your life. But when she talked about her faith, it was deeply personal to her. Not in a personal, like, oh, this means so much to me, but like, well, I was talking to God about this the other day. And when she would talk about her faith, it was like it was going both ways. But there was an actual relationship happening. Like, she was talking to God. Well, I was familiar with that. But then she was sensing that God somehow, in some way, was talking back. And she was passionate about it. And I could tell this was not trying to impress me. This was just who she was. And I remember, and you've heard my story before if you've been here very long, but I remember one night, this is after a couple of weeks where I'm kind of secretly asking around, well, what is this whole thing about? How does this work exactly? Without her knowing that I didn't have what she had. And so one night I just finally prayed. I'll never forget it. And I just prayed, God, I'm missing out. And I want what I see in my friends, who I trust and I value. So take me. Do whatever you want with me, because that's what I want. So it was a total, that last song we sang about, I'm all in kind of a phrase. That's what I did at 15 years old. And I meant it with everything in me. And you know what happened? God showed up in a way that I could never have anticipated, had never even heard of. And it was real. And the closest way I can explain it is that it was like I was completely enveloped in pure energy. I call that the Spirit, or one expression of it anyway. And it was exhilarating and freaking me out all at the same time. Because that stuff is weird. But it made a believer out of me. And I started to wonder more about unseen light. Because I'd never imagined that kind of thing actually happens. So that was my adolescence. As I'm trying to wrestle this through in high school and into early college, and it worked pretty well. However, as things often happen in adolescence, I got distracted just a touch, but girls mostly, and a couple parties here and there, and then my own need to be cool. I was never cool, let's make that clear, but I did get distracted. I got derailed, and after a while, out of not really being in the zone so much, even though the faith was deeply important to me, I knew I was not where I was, and it was jacking with me. And I remember after my decisions and all that stuff finally caught up with me in college, and it caught up with me. I was seriously broken, and I knew I needed to get back on track. I prayed again, and this is kind of what was going through my head at that moment. I was like, okay, for the last 4 years, I started off really strong and really meant what I said, and then I just went, I went off trail, and it hasn't worked out well for me. And you know what I felt like? When I was at this service, where I knew I was heading toward this moment with God in some way, everything that was going through my head was, okay, for the last 4 years, this person that I said was my best friend, I've been a terrible friend to. I have not paid attention to this friend. I've not listened to this friend. This friend has tried to reach out to me, and I've blown this friend off. And so in my head, I'm thinking, why would this friend ever want to pay any attention to me? I have no right. What right do I have to even pray? That's what was happening in my head. But everybody was telling me around me, everything I was hearing in this conference I was at was that God really is good. God is a forgive and forget kind of God. Grace is bigger than anything we can do, even to offend God. So I gave it a shot. I took the risk and asked for a restart. And a crazy thing happened. That same experience of the presence of God was there again, as comfort, as welcome home, as let's do this together. There's a passage that Jesus talks about the prodigal son who did what I did, essentially, and finally came to his senses and came back, and he was coming back to ask, it was a parable, asking his dad if he could just work for him. Because he knew being a worker for his dad, even if it was like a servant or a slave, was far better than what he'd been doing, because he'd still be in the company of his dad. And his dad runs to him, which is so profound, because older men in the Middle East don't run anywhere. But in this case, he runs to him and embraces him. Doesn't let him get a word out of his mouth about, his request or forgiveness or anything. He's just so happy to see his son. And he puts a ring on his finger which reinstates his authority as his son at the estate. And puts one of his expensive robes around his back, fully restored. That's how I felt that day. And it was one of the best cries I've ever had. I was 20 years old. And the tears were tears of regret and sorrow for the muck I've made in my life and hurt myself, hurt other people in the process. And at the same time, in a weird way, if you've ever experienced this, the tears were equally of joy because the Father welcomed me home. And that stuck. And it stuck for the whole next year when I met and married Lynn, and stuck as I went through the rest. I finished college, then we got married, and then went on to seminary for 3 years to get my master's. Stuck all the way through there in ministries I was involved there. Stuck for 4 years in my first pastorate in Northern Illinois, and stuck for my first 4 or 5 years here in Napa. That was my early adulthood. And then when I got here, some things started to catch up. And I got to say at this point, I am not telling you my story or anything about this unseen light business to try to tell you that my way is the right way. That's not it at all. I'm just telling you my story. And what I want to say before I move into this next thing is, if where you are is absolutely working for you, if you feel like you're dialed in and it's happening for you, that's awesome. I in no way am trying to, mess with your foundation. I'm just telling you my story. And what I want to tell you is that what I had learned to that point, even through master's level stuff, to become a pastor, there were some things that were just not gelling anymore. And it was because my first 4 years here or so were really hard. It's like the stuff I thought when I moved out here would work so well, it didn't work. I was very successful in Northern Illinois as a pastor, turning a church around, and we fully expected the same exact thing to happen here just as quickly. And it didn't. All the tricks in my bag didn't really work. And it's partly because they were tricks in the bag. And I started to think deeply about what I was doing and what I was saying and what I was trying to do. And I just got less and less compelled to continue on. And there was a point, I'd already done a lot of the work on my doctorate before I moved out here. I just had my thesis to do, dissertation. And, I was ready to pack it in. I was ready to quit. Not just quit the church, but quit ministry. Because in my head I was thinking, man, I just feel like I'm selling Jesus. Like it's just afterlife insurance. If I could just get them to sign on the dotted line, then I can give them some assurance of heaven. I don't mean to belittle this in any way, knowing that there's more to this life to come, and finding hope, and real solid hope where that is. That's incredible. But at that moment, how I felt, I just felt cheap. I felt like a used car salesman. If you're a used car salesman, I buy used cars, I'll buy one from you. So, no offense, but I think you know what I mean. I just felt like a huckster. And so I wanted to leave it. And felt like a failure, felt terrible about myself, felt like a loser in so many different ways. And I thought, before I pack it all in, I'm almost done with my doctorate. So let me use my dissertation, all the research for that, to really try to understand what I'm walking away from. And so I went in very deep to subjects called soteriology. It's the study of salvation. Because if that's what the whole thing's about, I want to make sure I'm walking away from the right thing. So I went deep, as deep as I could go with the time that I had, and there's more to find. But what I discovered changed my life and restored my faith. Actually, didn't just restore it, it blew it up and expanded it and set me on fire, because I realized that I had minimized what God had been trying to do and say through me all along. I'd been focused on this much of the message when it's this big. And once I figured out it's this big, it was like, I can spend my whole life thinking and talking about that. And it's still working. It's still in me. But one thing that it also did for me, because all the stuff that was there, I'm reading from scholars from the same seminary I got my master's from, which is a Baptist seminary. So these are people who value the story, who value the Bible, and from a very conservative way. And they're the ones who are opening up my eyes. So I started to wonder, good grief, how come I've never heard all this before? How it's been hidden? And it's because the resources that I got comfortable using, which are generally very popular resources that you can get just about anywhere, don't go there. They just don't talk about it. That's a terrible disadvantage that most of you don't even know that you have, is that most of the resources that are going to tell you a lot more is going on, they're not even available. I mean, they're hard to find. It's not something you're going to find in the Walmart shelves or wherever. And so that was very disconcerting to me. But it started making me wonder, well, gosh, I learned so much by going deep on that. I wonder if I turn my research to other areas, if I'll find out new things too. And so I started to go into areas that I'd been deeply troubled about for my whole faith. How do we understand evil? How do we understand suffering? How do we understand this whole concept of judgment and hell? Where does that come from? What's that all about? And then moved on to stuff that's much more relevant today, right now, of sexual orientation and all that stuff. And it just blew my mind, what was there and what wasn't there. But at some point in my brilliance, I started to lose something. Because when you deconstruct a theology, pay attention, when you deconstruct your theology, whatever it is, and it's rubble now, ready to be rebuilt. What that means for that period is you have rubble. You have no way to speak. You have no way to think. Because before all this, I could look at the names of God in the Bible and I'd be like, I don't know if I can even use that word. It's not really resonating with me. I don't. Have you ever been there where you're not even quite sure how to address God because you don't feel like you have the adequate words to do so, or they're hollow or something, or they're from another time, and you read some stories about God kicking some serious butt with very innocent people like children and women and animals, and you're like, man, how do I even think about this? Do I want anything to do with that God? How do we get that? And so we get to a place where we look at the culture and the context, and we're like, okay, we can just excuse that away, but then that goes the next step, and then you're like, well, what more do we excuse, and what more do we dismiss as just a time in history that no longer is anything? And before you know it, there is no unseen light to not see. because we've explained away the whole thing. Am I making any sense at all? And now you're left with absolutely nothing. And so you can't pray. You can't sing songs to God. You want to have this spiritual experience because you know it's out there, but you can't quite get your hands on it. That's where I was for a very long time. It's hard season to be in because you can't sing anymore. Not quite sure how to worship with your mouth anymore because there aren't songs that talk about, well, God, my theology is a big wreck, it's a big rubble, and I don't really know what to sing. So here you go. That's hard to make it rhyme, you know? That's where I was for quite a while. And that may be where you are because, you know, as I was writing the notes this week, I recognized that, you know, we've got an amazing variety of people here. Some of you were here when you literally voted on whether or not I should be your pastor, right? Raise your hand if you were here back then. Yeah, not too many left anymore. Most have passed on. The average age when I got here was 70 years old. And most of the people who are really the core, you know, who carried this church through thick and thin, they stayed and they were faithful. And man, I thank God for you. I truly do. And I'm not blowing smoke here. I sing your praises when I talk to other pastors and other venues and all that because you stuck it out and you took a huge risk. And I hope it's paying off, but a huge risk. And so some of you are here. I'm absolutely certain it doesn't matter who the pastor is for you, really. If it's me, you're going to be here. If it's somebody else, you're going to be here. Because this is your rootedness. This is your church. And you can't imagine being anywhere else. This is your community. This is where you worship God. This is where you serve together. And that's where you are. And so I know that we have folks here who are from that incredible camp who you newer folks have no idea what they endured. I mean, you think I put them through hell. There were a few chapters before me that were maybe as bad. So pretty tough stuff. But then I think also about a lot of you folks who have come because you resonate with kind of what I'm working through and how I teach and who we're becoming and our service mentality and all that. And what that informs me on is this, that I have helped many of you perhaps deconstruct your theology. And so that means if your story is anything like mine as I'm moving into maturity, age-wise and faith-wise, that you may have a bunch of rocks that used to be the foundation of your faith. And now you're like, well, now what? Thanks, Pete. You know, because I've made it very difficult for you now to know what to do next. So I want to tell you what I'm learning and what I'm doing because I'm in process too. And maybe what I'm learning and doing will be helpful to you too. I'm learning to, I never really lost this, but to believe more in unseen light. And to know that even though I can't get my brain around it, actually because I can't get my brain around it, God is. And God is bigger and more beautiful than I can imagine or control. And same with you. More compelling too. In the prelude in John's Gospel, it said that the light came into the darkness, but the darkness did not understand it. And this is a poetic way of saying that the world could not understand, which means get their hands around Jesus, which means they could not control Jesus. They didn't have big enough minds or arms to fully embrace God present. And I think that's a humility we need to walk in. No matter who we meet, no matter who we talk with, no matter what faith or whatever they're in, or whatever, we always realize we cannot imagine or fathom the fullness of God. Even the prophet in the Old Testament talked about that. My ways are higher than your ways. My thinking is bigger than yours. My dreams are bigger than yours. You can't. It's impossible. And so now what I do when I read the names of God, which are hundreds in the hundreds in the Old Testament. Ways of experiencing God. Now, instead of dismissing it as, Jehovah Jireh, whatever, man, that's your God, it's not my God. Now it's not the same anymore. Because now I go back and I walk alongside the people in those stories who are praying those prayers where God provided for that person. And I'm agreeing with that person. I'm saying, you know what? God is a provider. God does show up. And in seminary, we learn not to use exclusively masculine terminology for God. So that's actually when the New Revised Standard Version came out, and anywhere where it didn't have to be a he or men or whatever, they took it out and made it gender neutral. And we were told in seminary, you use gender neutral language for God, and so that's how I was trained. But you know what? There are times where I need to call God my Heavenly Father, where I need to say Abba, which is Daddy. I need it. It doesn't mean that also at other times I need to recognize God as Mother at the same time. I'm bringing this whole thing full circle back to my little air gun. Not only the names of God, not only the ways that we sing about God now, there is a way to communicate using the language, even though you know you're not 100% on the same page with those who are before. But I also have to conclude in my own walk that I can't understand everything, can't imagine everything, but I do know that the unseen is there. And I'm never going to necessarily see it or understand it. So things like prayer, which don't make any sense at all, works. And when I tap into prayer, which, when I think about it in terms of humility, so you're coming alongside God, asking God, first thing it should be doing in me is messing with me, changing me more into what God is all about. Even as I ask, I'm asking God, okay, help my vision here, because I remember 2010, World Series, and I'm falling to sleep. And I really want the Giants to win, right? I really want them to have a great game. And Buster Posey's an amazing player. And so I have a wrestling match with God, not literally. The wrestling match is this. I want to pray for Buster Posey to have a great game. And I'm like, is it okay to pray for Buster Posey? Is that right? Knowing that somebody else somewhere else is praying for whoever's going against Buster Posey or praying against Buster Posey. Is it okay for me to pray for that? And I decided it's okay to pray for Buster Posey. In fact, we all should pray for Buster Posey on a regular basis. Why not? But the point is this. The prayers that I pray in my feebleness and my small-mindedness, here's the good news. God doesn't answer all my feeble-minded, small-minded prayers. Thank God for that. But I do think the things that resonate with God, that are aligned with God, I think in some way it impacts things. I think in some way it grows that part of God in me, and I think in some way it actually does have an impact in the world around us. James, the brother of Jesus, says the prayer of the righteous is powerful and effective. And I believe that it is. A couple of weeks ago in Bible study, we're talking about a really interesting verse that shows up in the book of Daniel about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Really popular names today even. And anyway, it's an amazing story about these three guys who didn't do what the king wanted to do, and the king wanted to burn them alive. It's a wonderful children's story. And so he puts these three guys in a fiery furnace, and they don't die. And so he kicks up the heat a little bit more, that everything's glowing, people are dying, just getting too close to this thing. He looks in the window, and he sees that they're still there, but it's not just three guys. Now there's a fourth person in there. He's like, how'd that guy get in there? Why aren't any of these people dying? And it's one of these crazy stories. And you look at that, and you're like, wow, how do we make sense of that? I don't know. I don't know. But it was important enough for them to communicate it forward to us. Was it simply a story for us to kind of get the fact that God is with us? Maybe. Could it have been that, some kind of crazy thing happened where God showed up in a powerful moment that really did happen and people are still talking about it and studying it? Could be. Because unseen things happen. We don't always understand it. A few years ago, we were sure that plastic could not conduct electricity. And yet now, with smartphones and your wallets and stuff, you can put it on another piece of plastic that has the right stuff in between, and you can charge your phone without any wires going into it. We learn a lot over time. We used to think that Newton's laws applied across the board, and then quantum physics came along. And quantum physics is not prayer, it's not spirituality, but we started to learn through quantum physics that something we were sure was the case. Like gravity worked all the time the same way all the time, that it doesn't work the way on the smallest level. We used to think that simply observing something was a benign activity, that when you simply looked at something, you're looking at the thing that you're looking at would in no way impact the thing itself, until quantum physics came along and studied it and figured out that observation actually impacts the thing that we're looking at. We used to think that if you separated two things that were once one and you put them far distances away, that you could mess with one and it would have no impact on the other, until quantum physics came along and figured out if you jack with this thing in Philadelphia, the other half of it in Kansas City reacts the same way. We don't understand much. We're learning all the time, and for me, in my walk with God, I'm discovering unseen light is like that. Or I can't imagine how big God is, and I don't want to be the moron who puts a lid on the fullness of God because I have to understand it first. So I'm informed. I try to understand as much as I can, but I'm open. I try to be, because we just don't see everything. I listened to a podcast recently from Radiolab. Maybe you listen to it too. It's called From Tree to Shining Tree. A little play on G's actually. I advise you to listen to it if you just want an interesting mind blower. Because they found out that the way forests work are not like we thought. There's more going on beneath the surface than we ever imagined. And not just about teamwork with intertwining roots, much more complex than that. And when I hear stories like that, it just makes me wonder, good Lord, how much more do I not know? What I'm trying to say here is, you may be on your journey. You may be still at the beginning stage, and if faith is working for you at that point, God bless you. Keep it up. Because if it's working with you, if it's keeping you close with God, then awesome. That's great. But you may be at a point where you're starting to see things differently, and I'm going to encourage you, it's okay to push the boundaries of the box a little bit and open up the things you didn't think were possible about God. That's a good thing. And some of you are right where I was, where you recognize that the wheels might be coming off the bus of your faith and you're wanting to give up. You might call yourself an agnostic or an atheist or whatever, and I'm saying, hey, God bless you, I've been there. I know exactly what you feel. Don't shy away from that. Pour into it. Find out what's there. And you may be at a place where you've deconstructed. You're sure there's something there, but you're wondering what's next. And I'm saying, all right. I'm there right with you. So let's walk together through this. Walk together knowing that this greater other, this ground of being, really is here with us, informing us. We see it demonstrated in the person of Jesus, who was not afraid of unseen light, but embraced it, gave it away, entrusted it, and trusted it wherever he went. I have no idea if any of this was helpful for you. I feel like it's what I needed to say. And this week, if you start to have some doubts, and just remember, yes, correct it. Just remember, you don't have to understand everything for everything to be there. That God is bigger, more glorious, mysterious even, than we can ever define and control. And that is a very wonderful thing. So, with that, let's do a very mysterious thing. And let's pray to God. Please join me. What a crazy thing this is that we're doing, God, that we would join together and speak out loud, speak in the inner chambers of our hearts to you. And yet we're doing it because it works, and it's worked for eons, and it worked before anybody could name you. I knew there was more to the story. I'm praying, God, that you will give us a hunger for more. Give us the freedom to not have to understand everything. Allow us to allow you to be big, mysterious, greater than we could ever imagine. And yet we ask, God, that somehow your Spirit would be extremely personal and come alongside us, because we need to know that you are. Don't just be big. We're asking you to be small too. So may we be your people in process, in the midst of discovery. May who we're learning about you and your glory and your beauty and your grace, may it inform our hearts, our minds, our mouths, and what we do with our hands and our feet. May more people recognize that there is light to be seen simply because we've been trying our darndest to walk in the light and to reflect it when we can. We thank you for loving us even though, for loving us through it all, for being light even when we were dark, for being with us even when we doubted. Help us be faithful. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.